I was always the first guy to arrive at the office and the last one to turn off the lights. In my 12 years at Advanced Dynamics, that had become my whole identity. I was the developer working behind the scenes, the man who kept the infrastructure alive while the younger managers spent their mornings chatting by the espresso machines and their afternoons planning golf outings. I did not mind the hard work itself, but I hated being treated like I was invisible. When our product succeeded, my name never appeared in the press releases. Even though I had written the system from the ground up, clients praised our software as if Charles Vance himself had built it line by line in the dark. But Charles did not know the first thing about coding. He was the classic salesman, all clean teeth, expensive suits, and just enough jargon to fool the investors. I was the one who spent late nights debugging, rewriting sloppy scripts, and saving critical demonstrations minutes before investor calls. The rest of the team treated me like the office grandfather. They gave me polite nods and occasional thanks, but they never gave me the respect they showed each other. I would speak up in meetings only to be talked over, and then a junior developer would repeat my exact suggestion 5 minutes later and receive a pat on the back from Charles. Charles Vance was 42 years old, and he was my boss. He had a way of looking at you like you were just an expense on his spreadsheet. I had been with him since the beginning, back when the company was just a crude prototype running on a clean web host. We sat in a dusty basement 12 years ago, eating cold pizza and drinking cheap coffee. Back then, he looked me in the eye and promised that we were partners. He swore that my hard work would translate into substantial equity and that I would never have to worry about my future. I believed in the product, and I poured my life into building it. I worked through illnesses, skipped family reunions, and spent my holidays writing code to meet his impossible deadlines. But as the money started coming in, his memory faded. Soon, promotions only went to his friends from the country club. I had not received a salary raise in 4 years, even though my workload had tripled. I managed the entire database, optimized our cloud systems, and resolved every major technical issue that our clients faced. My daily routine was an endless cycle of monitoring server logs and refactoring legacy systems that were written by developers who had long since left the company. My desk was situated in the corner of the room, right next to the cooling fans of the server closet. It was noisy and drafty, but it allowed me to hear the system breathing. Charles, on the other hand, worked in a pristine corner office with double-pane glass doors that blocked out all sound. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, looking out over the downtown skyline, while I stared at terminal windows and code syntax. The physical distance between our workspaces was only 30 feet, but in terms of status, it felt like we were in different worlds. Lately, I noticed a change in the office atmosphere. Charles had started bringing in young interns who were the sons of his wealthy golf buddies. They wore designer clothes, talked about their stock portfolios, and had no real technical skills. They spent their days hanging around Charles's office, laughing at his jokes and looking important. I was left to clean up their messes and run the entire engineering department without any assistance. One morning, I found one of these interns trying to access our production databases with root privileges. When I stopped him and explained the danger, he laughed and told me Charles had given him permission to play around in the system. My stomach sank. The security of our company was being treated like a playground for spoiled children. Meanwhile, Charles became increasingly cold toward me. He canceled our weekly meetings and started asking Sean Brody, a junior developer with less than 2 years of experience, to lead our team calls. It was clear they were trying to push me out. I kept my head down and kept working because the big demonstration was coming up. We were presenting our systems to a group of major venture capitalists for a funding round worth $120 million. The entire demonstration depended on my Cloud Core server framework. Without my code, the system could not handle a single user request. I stayed late every night that week, making sure the setup was stable. I ran load testing simulations, checked network latency, and optimized database queries, but the feeling of being replaced never left me. I felt like a man building a beautiful house, only to see the owner quietly preparing to hand the keys to someone else. One Thursday evening, I stayed late to run a database backup. As I walked past Charles's office, I heard voices. The door was cracked open. I heard Charles talking to Linda Jenkins, the Human Resources Director. Charles was laughing. He said that I had been around too long and was no longer flexible enough for their new direction. Linda agreed, saying she was too professional to make a scene and would probably just walk away quietly. I stood in the dark hallway, my hands cold. I did not confront them. I walked back to my desk, opened my personal server connections, and began preparing my response. I knew that my years of dedication meant nothing to them, and I resolved to protect myself. After hearing Charles and Linda whispering in the office, I sat at my desk for a long time. The office was empty, save for the hum of the server room and the soft glow of my monitors. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I was 54 years old, and I had spent over a decade building a company that was now trying to discard me. I decided to dig into the company records. Since I had built the back-end infrastructure, I had access to our internal legal repository. I wanted to see the exact terms of my original employment agreement. What I found shocked me. I pulled up the folder containing the intellectual property assignment agreements. There was a document with my name on it, dated 12 years ago. It was the agreement that supposedly transferred the ownership of my pre-existing software code to Advanced Dynamics. But as I looked at the digital copy, my stomach twisted. The signature at the bottom of the page was not mine. It was a digital copy of my signature pasted onto the document with slight misalignments. The date was retroactive, filled in with a font that did not match the rest of the text. Charles had forged my signature to claim my personal work. I remembered that when I first joined the company, I had already built the core database licensing engine on my own personal time. I had refused to sign the standard IP assignment agreement because we had agreed that I would retain ownership of my original work and license it to the company for a royalty. Charles had verbally agreed, promising we would sign a formal licensing contract later. But we never did. As the years went by, I became too busy with daily firefighting to press the issue. Now, as the company prepared for a massive investment round, Charles must have realized that they could not pass the investors' due diligence process without showing sole ownership of the core system. Instead of negotiating with me honestly, he had forged my signature on a retroactive agreement. This was a direct violation of California Penal Code Section 470. Walter Higgins explained that forgery of this nature was a serious felony under state law. When someone pastes up a signature or retroactively alters a binding contract without consent, they commit fraud that invalidates the entire instrument. Under established contract law, a forged signature makes a contract void from the very beginning. The legal term is void ab initio. This meant the agreement was legally worthless, and Advanced Dynamics had absolutely no right to my core software engine. The law did not recognize Advanced Dynamics' claim to the Cloud Core repository because they had obtained it through a criminal act. I had spent years worrying that I had signed away my rights, and learning that the document was a complete fabrication gave me a sudden sense of relief. The next morning, I contacted my personal attorney, Walter Higgins, who had helped me with contract reviews in the past. I explained the situation and sent him the digital files. Walter was stunned. He analyzed the metadata of the document and confirmed that the file had been modified and saved by Charles's user account just 6 months ago. Walter explained that because the contract was void, I remained the sole owner of the copyright to the licensing engine. Under federal copyright law, specifically Title 17, United States Code, Section 106, I had the exclusive right to reproduce and display the work. Walter told me that we could file for an emergency injunction to stop Advanced Dynamics from using my code. I told Walter to prepare the lawsuit and a formal cease and desist letter, but to wait for my signal to serve them. I wanted to wait for the perfect moment. The upcoming demo was the key. The entire platform relied on an automated license validation mechanism that I had written years ago. Every 15 minutes, the platform would ping a validation server to verify that the software license was active and valid. If the server responded with a revocation code, the system would immediately lock down all user access to prevent unauthorized use. I had hosted this validation server on my own personal web hosting account, paying for it out of my own pocket since the company had refused to cover the cost. Charles had no idea that this license validation loop even existed, let alone that it ran on a server under my sole control. I had the power to revoke their license with a single click. I spent the next 2 days preparing my own infrastructure. I wanted to make sure that my validation server was secure and that the logs were perfectly documented. If Charles tried to claim that I had sabotaged the system, I would have ironclad proof that I had simply revoked a license that they had obtained through forgery. I documented every single instance where my signature had been copied, compiling a detailed report of the digital artifacts in the PDF file. I also downloaded my original project logs from 12 years ago, showing that the licensing engine had been completed before my official start date at Advanced Dynamics. I saved these files to a secure encrypted drive. I felt no hesitation. I had given this company my best years, and they had responded with theft. I was ready to defend my rights. By Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office had turned icy. The younger developers avoided looking at me, and Linda from Human Resources seemed busy organizing paperwork. Charles Vance walked through the development room only once, his eyes flicking past my desk as if I were already gone. He was focused on the investor presentation, which was now just 3 days away. I spent my day completing my tasks, ensuring that the cloud databases were synchronized and that the systems were fully operational for the demo. I knew this would be my last week, but I wanted everything to be in perfect order. I was not going to give them any excuse to accuse me of negligence. I documented my active projects, wrote clear instructions for the junior staff, and ensured that the server backups were running on schedule. I made sure every deployment script was commented and that the database indexing was optimized for high traffic. I wanted my departure to be completely free of technical blame. During our morning stand-up meeting, Sean Brody attempted to explain the database setup to the team. He stumbled over basic concepts, confusing server latency with data throughput. Charles interrupted him, not to correct him, but to praise his visionary leadership and fresh perspective. I sat in the back of the room, listening to them talk about my architecture as if they had built it themselves. I kept my mouth shut, knowing that Sean did not understand how the licensing validation checks worked. Charles glanced at me, his eyes filled with a patronizing pity. He thought he was about to get rid of a costly veteran and replace him with a cheap junior who would do whatever he was told. I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that they were walking into a legal wall. On Tuesday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, the invite appeared in my inbox. It was a meeting request from Linda, scheduled for 5 o'clock that same day. There was no agenda, just a blank calendar block. I took a deep breath, saved my active code, and closed my development tools. I stood up, walked down the glass corridor, and entered the main conference room. The room was cold, smelling of stale coffee and leather. Charles was already there, sitting next to Linda. Neither of them would meet my eyes. I did not sit down. I stood at the end of the table and waited. Charles cleared his throat and looked at a folder in front of him. He told me that the company was undergoing a structural reorganization to align with their long-term strategic goals. He said that my role was being eliminated, effective immediately. He spoke in a flat, practiced tone, reading from a script. Linda then pushed a folder toward me and said they were offering me a severance package of 3 months of salary, provided I signed a non-disclosure agreement. Charles leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table, trying to project authority. He told me that technology was moving too fast for people of my generation, and that they needed a team leader who could speak the language of modern venture capitalists. I realized he was using buzzwords to justify his own incompetence and his theft of my work. He was hoping that my quiet nature would prevent me from asking difficult questions or seeking legal counsel. I decided to play the role he expected, keeping my face expressionless and my voice neutral. I nodded slowly as if accepting his rationale, while mentally calculating the exact timestamp of the upcoming server check. I looked at the papers, then looked at Charles. I asked him if he was sure about this decision, especially with the investor demonstration only 3 days away. Charles smirked, regaining his usual confidence. He leaned back in his leather chair and told me that Sean Brody and the rest of the team were fully capable of handling the demo. He said that the system was already built, and they did not need me to watch over it anymore. He told me they expected me to leave quietly and professionally, as I always did. He added that the company was moving toward a younger, more dynamic culture, and that my traditional methods did not fit their future plans. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or show any anger. I simply smiled, a small, calm smile that seemed to make Charles uncomfortable. I picked up my company laptop, placed it gently on the center of the table, and slid it toward him. I told him that everything they needed was on the machine, and that the demo environment was fully prepared. Charles looked relieved, thanking me for being professional. Linda then stood up and escorted me to my desk to pack my personal belongings. The office was quiet as I placed my coffee mug, a few technical manuals, and some notebooks into a cardboard box. No one said a word, though Keith Davis, a junior engineer I had mentored, looked at me with deep concern. I gave him a reassuring nod. Linda escorted me to the elevator, and the doors slid shut. As the elevator descended, I looked at my watch. It was exactly 5:15. In 15 minutes, the server would run its scheduled validation check. My admin access had just been revoked by Linda, which triggered the validation loop to check the status of my license. Since I had already updated the server to mark the company's license as disputed due to copyright theft, the system was about to find that the license was invalid. I walked out of the building, feeling the cool air on my face, and did not look back. I walked out of the building and into the cool evening air. I walked 3 blocks to a quiet corner cafe, sat by the window and ordered a black coffee. The cafe was warm and smelled of roasted beans, a sharp contrast to the cold glass office I had just left. I placed my personal phone on the table and waited. Exactly 15 minutes after I left the office, at 5:30, the first alert appeared on my screen. It was an automated notification from my personal license server. The validation handshake had failed because Advanced Dynamics was now running the software without a valid license. The server had sent a lockdown instruction to the platform. Within minutes, the entire demo environment was sealed shut. It was in read-only mode, and any attempt to perform an action would result in a database connection crash. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from Keith Davis. Keith asked me if I had done something to the systems before leaving, explaining that Sean Brody was trying to run the demo scripts, but the entire database was locked. Keith said that the system was throwing an authorization error they had never seen before. He said that Sean had tried to manually restart the main database container, but had accidentally deleted the active configuration directory, making the lockdown permanent. I replied to Keith telling him that my access had been terminated and that he should ask Charles Vance for help. At 5:45, my phone rang. The screen showed Charles's name. I let it ring. He called 3 more times, and then he sent a text message. He demanded that I call him back immediately and explain what was wrong with the servers. He threatened to sue me for sabotage, claiming that I was destroying the company's assets. I did not reply. I sat in the cafe, sipping my coffee, watching the rain start to fall against the window. I felt a profound sense of peace. For 12 years, I had carried the weight of that company on my shoulders, constantly worrying about their systems. I remembered all the other late nights I had spent debugging under intense stress, and I realized that this was the first night in a decade that I did not have to log in to verify server availability. The rain outside washed the dusty pavement, symbolizing the clean break I was making from my past. The phone call attempts stopped, and I put the device back in my pocket. The next morning, the situation escalated. My attorney, Walter Higgins, officially served Advanced Dynamics and their legal representatives with the copyright infringement lawsuit and the cease and desist notice. Walter Higgins handled the filing with extreme efficiency. He made sure that the federal court clerk stamped the documents before 9 in the morning, and he personally called the legal representatives of the venture capital firms to alert them. This ensured that the investors had the paperwork in their hands before they even stepped into the Advanced Dynamics office. The lawsuit detailed the forged signature on the assignment agreement, citing California Penal Code Section 470, and requested an immediate federal injunction to stop the company from using the CloudCore framework under Title 17. The news began to spread on industry news sites, which published articles detailing the sudden collapse of Advanced Dynamics infrastructure and the legal dispute. By 10 o'clock, the investors arrived at the office for the presentation. The lead investor was Roger Crawford, a seasoned venture capitalist who had no patience for corporate drama. Charles tried to bluff them, claiming it was a temporary server synchronization issue. But the investors were seasoned tech professionals. They saw the lockdown screens and the copyright dispute notices. When Roger Crawford read the legal document served by my lawyer, he realized the company was facing a federal lawsuit. Roger Crawford was a veteran investor who had survived 3 separate market bubbles. He knew that an intellectual property dispute could tie up a startup in federal court for years, costing millions of dollars in legal fees and destroying any hope of a public launch. When he saw the forensic evidence of forgery compiled by Walter Higgins, he did not even wait to hear Charles's explanation. He stood up, packed his tablet into his leather briefcase, and told his associates that they were leaving. The other board members followed his lead, leaving Charles alone in the glass conference room, with a failing demo and a looming federal lawsuit. By noon, the investors walked out. Roger Crawford formally withdrew their funding proposal, calling Charles's company a massive liability. The $120 million funding round was dead. Charles called me again, leaving a desperate voicemail. His voice was shaking, stripped of all his usual arrogance. He begged me to come back, offering to double my salary and give me a partner title if I would just unlock the system. He said we could settle the dispute privately. I did not return his call. That evening, I received an email from Catherine Foster, the co-founder of Crestwave Technologies. Catherine was a respected figure in the industry, known for her focus on robust engineering. She wrote that she had heard about the lawsuit and the collapse of the demo. She said she had always known that I was the technical mind behind Advanced Dynamics and wanted to meet to discuss a new venture. She offered to provide the seed funding for a new data platform, provided I led the project as the majority owner. I realized that my 12 years of hard work had not been wasted. The industry knew who had built the system, and they wanted the engineer, not the salesman. We met at a quiet diner 2 days later. Catherine Foster was direct and professional. She did not want a flashy slide deck. She wanted to see my architectural plans. She explained that she had worked with executive salesmen like Charles before, men who built empires on the backs of silent engineers and then discarded them when they became too expensive. She had watched Advanced Dynamics rise, and she immediately noticed that the technical architecture was designed by someone with a deep, methodical mind, not by someone who spent his time in sales meetings. She wanted to build a company that did the opposite, based on transparency and respect. The diner was a quiet, unassuming place with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that had not been updated in 20 years. It was the perfect spot to discuss a new start, far away from the polished glass offices of the venture capitalists. We sat there for 3 hours, drinking coffee and talking about system architecture. Catherine was not interested in short-term profit metrics or exit strategies. She wanted to build a business that lasted, one that respected both its workers and its users. She listened as I explained my thoughts on decentralized storage and the importance of keeping user data secure from advertisers. She agreed with every point, sharing her own experiences with greedy executives who destroyed tech platforms by chasing quick growth. I showed her the wireframes and system flows of a new platform I had been designing in my spare time, which I called Baseline. It was a secure, decentralized data management tool designed for small businesses and independent teams. Catherine loved the simplicity and the focus on privacy. She agreed to invest $2 million in seed capital, leaving me with 60% ownership of the company. We shook hands, and I felt a surge of energy that I had not felt in years. The next day, Keith Davis resigned from Advanced Dynamics and joined me as our lead front-end developer. We rented a small office with second-hand desks and set up our server racks. Our small office had large windows that let in the morning suns, a welcome change from the dark, windowless server room at Advanced Dynamics. We spent our mornings drinking coffee and discussing code architecture, working together as equals. There was no hierarchy, no hidden agendas, and no executive taking credit for another person's intellect. Keith developed a beautiful, minimalist interface that made the platform easy to use, while I spent my time refining the back-end performance. We tested the system with a small group of local users, adjusting the features based on their direct feedback. Building a company this way was slow and steady, but it was honest. Keith focused on the user interface, ensuring it was simple and clean, while I built a secure backup system. We worked hard, but the environment was entirely different. There was no politics, no golf talk, and no stolen credit. We respected each other, and we built the software with integrity. Meanwhile, Vance Dynamics was in ruins. Without the funding round, they could not pay their debts or maintain their cloud infrastructure. The board of directors launched an internal investigation into the failed demo and discovered the forgery. To avoid federal prosecution, the board forced Charles Vance to resign as CEO and stripped him of his shares. The company filed for restructuring, and its assets were sold off to competitors. Charles Vance's reputation in the tech industry was completely destroyed. He went from a rising star to a pariah, unable to secure any executive role. I did not feel any joy in his downfall. I only felt a sense of closure. The system had worked, and the truth had come out. 3 months after we started, Baseline launched its first public version. The platform was incredibly stable, and users praised its clean interface and security features. Within our first month, we signed up over 150 organizations, including a mutual aid network in Pennsylvania and an education group in Vermont. They sent us emails of appreciation, telling us that the software had allowed them to coordinate food drives and class schedules without paying exorbitant licensing fees. Seeing the real-world impact of our clean code was the ultimate reward. We even signed up 2 of the major investors who had walked out of Charles's demo. They told me they were glad to finally invest in a platform built by a real engineer. As the weeks went by, Baseline continued to grow. One evening, after a long day of coding, Keith and I sat in our office, watching the user registration numbers rise. Keith smiled and asked me if I ever regretted leaving Vance Dynamics. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I told him that my only regret was not leaving sooner, but that I had learned valuable lessons about self-worth. I was no longer the invisible man working in the dark. I was the founder of my own company, speaking directly to our clients and being heard. We had built something honest and useful, and we had done it without compromising our values. That night, as I locked the office door and walked to my car, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The true revenge was not the lawsuit, the lost funding, or Charles's ruined career. The true revenge was my independence. I had reclaimed my work, built a better future, and finally found the peace that had eluded me for 12 years.